the young adults are. You just came in and you didn't grab one. There are maps on the back queue back there. That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. Let's see. If you all watched the videos last week that I posted on Facebook, you would see that this is what I did last week too. I just went through the young adults curriculum and taught what we were going through in the young adults class. Last week it was the 3 dispensations. This week it's the Holy Lands. This is not really that long of a lesson. I know it looks really long, but that's because it's mostly maps. So we're going to be looking at the Holy Lands. The Holy Lands is a region of the world in which all of the biblical events occur, right? So the broadest definition of the Holy Lands ranges from Italy, modern-day Italy, all the way to Mesopotamia, whatever country is there today. That's the grandest definition of the Holy Lands, of the lands that biblical events occurred in. This first map on your first page is going to be the eastern part of the Holy Lands, and this is where everything starts. So I've broken this down into different sections, and the sections correspond with a timeline, right? So we're starting at the beginning of the biblical record, and we're really going to cover, if we get through the entire lesson, we're really going to cover the entire Bible's timeline within this class period, just looking at where events happen. So, all right, the first little section we're going to look at is the Fertile Crescents. Okay, you can see on the map there's this giant piece of land, and you can see there's a giant desert in the middle of that land. That's the Syrian desert. And you can see above the desert there's a bunch of green land, right, cresting, right? That green land, or black and white for some of you the green land is known as the Fertile Crescents, right? The reason why it's called the Fertile Crescents is just because it's cresting a desert. There's a few big bodies of water that I want you to look at. Anytime you look at a map of the Bible lands, my eye always goes to the bodies of water to get my bearings. So a couple big bodies of water here. We'll look at 2 of them. The first is the Mediterranean Sea. That's on the far left-hand side of the picture. Almost everything goes back to the Mediterranean Sea, right? The Mediterranean Sea splits Europe and Africa. It's that sea that's in between Europe and Africa. The Middle East here, the Fertile Crescent, this is where Europe, Africa, and Asia all meet together, right? So this is not just like really important land for Bible history. This is also a really important land for world history, because this is where those 3 major continents collide on land, and so there's going to be a lot of major historical events that occur here, and Israel happens to be in the middle of all of them. So, another thing on this map is the region of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is the birthplace of civilization. Does anybody remember? Kristen can't answer it. Does anybody remember from their elementary school days, or their school days in general, what Mesopotamia means? Do you remember it? Okay, well then you can't answer it.
Isn't it like the land between the rivers?
Yeah, Carly gets the gold sticker. Yeah, it's the land between the rivers. Yeah. Coincidentally, she was the most recent graduate, so that makes sense that she. Yeah, it's the land between the rivers. The rivers Euphrates and the river Tigris really flow southeastwards, but most of the time people would be traveling, or at least Abraham, who was the first one to be doing it. They travel northwestwards towards Europe along these rivers, along these two rivers. The land between the rivers is Mesopotamia. This is the birthplace of civilization. We're going to see as we continue through this lesson today that 3 of the 5 world empires all originated from this small plot of land, this land between the rivers. So, all right, on to page 2 here. See, I told you. It might look like a beast, but we're going to be going through it pretty quick. This is a zoomed-in picture of a section of the Holy Lands. This is the Promised Land. This is modern-day Israel, right? Like I said, every time you look at a map, draw your eye to the nearest, biggest body of water. In the top left-hand corner, you're going to see the Mediterranean Sea, right? It's blue or it's white. See, I've got a black and white one too, so y'all who missed out on the colored version, you can take solace in the fact that I too am among you. That body of water there is the Mediterranean Sea, so we're right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, right? 2 more big bodies of water here. The first one is at the bottom. Anybody know what that sea is?
Dead Sea.
That's the Dead Sea. And what about the smaller one on top?
Galilee.
That's the Sea of Galilee. And what's the river that joins the two?
Jordan.
That's the Jordan River. So you got the Mediterranean Sea, you got the Sea of Galilee, you got the Dead Sea, and they're joined together by the Jordan River. Right? Every time that you look at a map, what you ought to be looking for is probably the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. So if you back up to the first page to get your bearings, right? If you can spot this itty bitty piece of black there towards the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, that's the Dead Sea. It's about the size of a grain of rice. That is the Dead Sea. So when we're looking about the Promised Land, we're looking at this land right here on the coast of the Mediterranean. Right? I hope you all have good eyesight. All right, on to page 76 here. I promise we're going to slow down as we get deeper into this lesson. Now we come to Egypt and Sinai. Again, we're following the time period here. Abraham starts off on the eastern edge of the Fertile Crescent, and he winds up on the far western edge of the Fertile Crescent. And then Abraham's descendants, where do they go to at the end of the book of Genesis?
They're in Egypt.
They go down into Egypt. They're in Egypt for 400 years, right? So they go down into Egypt. Again, this is a picture of Egypt. Draw your eye to the biggest body of water here. That's the top of the page. That's the Mediterranean Sea. So we're still on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but now we've moved down a little. You can also see in the top right-hand corner, what's that small little body of water in the top right-hand corner?
Dead Sea.
That's the Dead Sea. So we've moved northwest or southwest of where we were just at in the Promised Land. So another big body of water is the Red Sea. This picture calls it the Reed, in parentheses, Red Sea. That's because that's what people think it was. That's why it's called the Red Sea, because it's a mistranslation. Anyway, you can see that there are 2 arms of the Red Sea. The left arm is the Gulf of Suez, and the right arm is the Gulf of Aqaba. When Moses and the Israelites are fleeing from the Egyptians, and Moses splits the Red Sea, Moses is splitting the Gulf of Suez. Somewhere on there, this is not a good map because this takes a little bit of a literal view, but somewhere in the Gulf of Suez is where Moses split the Red Sea. The the Egyptians pursued. They were drowned, and then the Israelites emerged victorious on the other side of the Red Sea in the Sinai Peninsula. Right? So you see those two arms of the Red Sea? Well, they form a bit of a triangular shaped piece of land. Right? That upside down triangle is the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is where the Israelites wandered for 40 years. So for those whole 40 years, they're just wandering around in this desert, this deserted peninsula. Another body of water to look at is the Nile. You see there's that, on the black and white, it's this dark gray sliver. It starts off as a line at the bottom, and then it turns into its own triangle towards the top, towards the Mediterranean Sea. If we had it in color, you would see that's all green, right? That's all fertile land. All that green, lush area is the Nile River, right? The Nile River is, I believe it's one of only 2 rivers in the entire world that flows from south to north. All the other rivers flow either east to west or north to south. But the Nile River is flowing northwards, and just before it gets to the Mediterranean River, it branches off into several different sections, and it forms a bunch of smaller rivers, and that branched off section is called the Nile Delta. Whenever a river branches off, it turns that's termed as a delta. So you can see why you have heard about the Nile River before, is because the Nile River is the only piece of lush land in the entire Egyptian desert. Almost all their civilization is built around this Nile Delta. So, talking about Israel, for 400 years, they are in Egypt, they're in the Nile Delta. If you can see it on your map there, they're actually in the land of Goshen. So they've got this particular sect of land that they are living in for 400 years. And then, during the 10 plagues, during the Exodus, they travel southwards, rather than cutting straight towards the Promised Land. They travel southwards towards the Red Sea, cross the Red Sea into the Sinai Peninsula. They end up traveling northwards into the Promised Land for a little time. You remember the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 spies, I should say, the 12 spies that entered the land and said, were like grasshoppers in their sight and all that. Well, after those 12 spies said that we can't inherit the Promised Land, God sent them back down into the Sinai Peninsula where they wandered for 40 years. So, another thing to note on this map is you see that city, Kadesh Barnea. That was pretty much their headquarters for most of the 40 years wandering. So it wasn't just like they were marching for 40 years nonstop. It was they set up a camp and they stayed there for most of the 4 years. So, all right, on to the next page, page 77. Let's start looking at tribes. If you were to count up the tribes, I put them up on the right-hand side of this page. If you were to count up the tribes that are listed here on the map, you would not come up with 12 tribes of Israel. You would find that there are 14 tribes of Israel. Dan, Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar. 1/2 of Manasseh, that's what's labeled on this map here. Manasseh, Gad, Ephraim, Dan, Benjamin, Judah, Reuben, Simeon. Those are listed from north to south, right? At the forefront, you could probably notice that there are a couple repeats. Manasseh is repeated twice, and Dan is also repeated twice. And if you're really astute, you might also notice that there is one tribe missing, and that's the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi has no tribal land allotment. So turn on over to the next page, page 78. Here's how the map turns out. So if we counted up all those tribes, we come up with 14 tribes, but we can subtract one Dan tribe because it was a repeat, and we can subtract one Manasseh tribe because it was a repeat, and that comes to 12 tribes. So it's still correct to say that there were 12 tribes of Israel. However, if you add Levi back into the mix, you come up with 13 tribes again. There were, in fact, probably in the most legitimate case scenario possible, there were 13 tribes of Israel, right? Even though there were, practically speaking, 13 tribes of Israel, it's still okay to say that there were 12 tribes of Israel. And the reason it's okay to say that there were 12 tribes of Israel is because there were 2 tribes that really counted as one tribe. You remember there were 12 sons of Israel? Okay, well, one of the sons, Joseph, got a double portion, a double inheritance. Right? Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each were regarded as the same status as their uncles. Right? And so, here's the map on that, this bottom, page 78, towards the bottom. You've got 12 sons of Israel, minus 1 Levi tribe because they didn't get a land allotment. They didn't get any land because they were the priestly tribe. God didn't want them to inherit too much power, so they didn't get any land because they were priests. And then you add back 1/2 tribe of Ephraim and 1/2 tribe to Manasseh, and you come to 12 tribes. So it's correct to say 12 tribes of Israel, though you could, depending on how you could count it, you could get up to all the way to 15 tribes. So. All right, on to the next page. Any questions, comments? This is a good stopping point because this is really at the end of the Pentateuch here.
There's 2 of Dan because one settled on the east coast of Jordan before they got to the promised land.
That's right. Thanks. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, Dan. The reason why Dan is mentioned twice is because they inherited that first plot of land there on the coast of the Mediterranean, and then they decided to move north later on. So, yeah. So they never inherited both plots of land at the same time.
They did.
No, that was Manasseh.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
split over
Yeah.
to Jordan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if I remember right.
Well, they got that one before they
Yes.
all went over.
Yeah. Yeah.
They told me.
Yep. So that's why Dan's mentioned twice. Any other special questions right here? All right, let's look at kingdoms. And when we're looking at kingdoms, we're not looking at world kingdoms. We're looking at Israeli kingdoms. As you know, there were, because of last week's sermon, if you listen to it on Facebook, there were generally 3 kingdoms. You've got the United Kingdom, which is 1, and then you've got the divided kingdom, which is 2. You've got the North Kingdom and the South Kingdom. So that first picture on the top is the United Kingdom, and then the bottom picture is the divided kingdom. The United Kingdom reached its zenith, it reached its height and power under Solomon's reign. Right? You can see that the territory extends far beyond the promised land during Solomon's reign. It reaches all the way down, starting to go into the Sinai Peninsula. This picture doesn't label it. Well, actually, maybe it does. Yeah, it does. This picture labels it. The border is the river of Egypt, so they go all the way down to the river of Egypt. That's not the Nile River. That's the Wadi El Irish. The young adults, we've talked about that before. A wadi is a seasonal river, only comes around during the winter time. So their border extended all the way down to the river of Egypt, getting into the Sinai Peninsula a little, and their border extended all the way northward, all the way up to the Euphrates River. You see that little bend, that large bend in a river that's blue in the top right-hand corner. That's the Euphrates River. That's the river that Abraham followed, following the Fertile Crescent down into the Promised Land. So Solomon grew the Israeli Empire into a very large territory of land under his reign, but after he died, his son came into power, Rehoboam came into power, split the kingdom in 2, and then you've got the north and you've got the south. You've got the north, which has a couple of nicknames. Their capital is Samaria, and so sometimes the whole people is called Sumerians, not Samaritans, though those are used interchangeably by the time we get to the New Testament. And they're also sometimes called, they're called Ephraimites. I think that's how you would describe it. Ephraim was the most notable of the 10 tribes that comprise the northern nation. So sometimes they're called Ephraimites. Most commonly, they're called just Israelites. They kept the name Israel because they had the most tribes. So, The south, their biggest tribe was Judah, and so they adopted the name Judah. So whenever you hear after the division, when you're reading the Bible, whenever you hear talk about Judah, what they're talking about is the southern kingdom, right? That is also where the name Jew came from. So the name Jew is after Judah. The name Israel, Israelites, is named after Israel. What was Israel's first name before his name was changed? Jacob, right? And then Hebrew is named after Abraham, because Hebrew means from beyond the river, and that's what Abraham did. He traveled from beyond the river, beyond the Fertile Crescent, to come and settle into the Promised Land. So Hebrew, Israelite, Jew. 3 names for the same people. Okay, on to the next part here. Let's look at some neighboring nations. Generally speaking, the residents of the Promised Land were called Canaanites. The original residents of the Promised Land were called Canaanites. So think about the original residents of the Americas. They were called Native Americans. Now there's a push in woke culture to change their name to indigenous people. That one's harder to pronounce though. They had a name for the original residents. Those in the Promised Land originally were called Canaanites, though Canaanites were divided up into a few different subcategories. So think about the Greeks, for example, right? The Grecian Empire, or just the Grecian territory. Sparta and Athens, those are the 2 most famous city-states there in Greece. We combine all of those small city-states, like Sparta, like Athens, like Corinth, and a few others. We combine all those and describe them all as Greeks. Well, that's what they did with the Canaanites too. They combined the Philistines, the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Phoenicians, and several others, and all of those were called Canaanites, right? Anyway, so when you hear tell about the Canaanites, just know that there were a lot of them. There were a lot of subcategories, and these were the original inhabitants of the Promised Land before the conquest, and even after the conquest, because they didn't do their job fully and they didn't conquer, they didn't wipe out these Canaanites as they were supposed to. Israel also had a couple of sister nations and cousin nations. That's what I call them: sister nations, cousin nations. They had 2 sister nations and they had 2 cousin nations. The first of the sister nations came from Ishmael. Who was Ishmael? Abraham's first son, which would have made him Isaac's brother, half-brother, right? So Isaac ended up forming the nation of Israel through his son, and Ishmael ended up forming the Ishmaelite people. A lot of times you'll hear them called Arabs. The Ishmaelites would have also been the originator of modern-day Muslims, right? So Ishmaelites and the Jews, they were sister nations because they came from 2 brothers, Isaac and Ishmael. Then, moving down 1 generation to Jacob and Esau, Jacob, renamed Israel, formed the Israelites. Esau, also known as Edom, formed the Edomites. Right? The thing that the Edomites is most well known for today is Indiana Jones, which is really funny. If you all have seen Indiana Jones 3, whatever the crusade thing is, the Last Crusade, you remember at the end of the movie where they go into this giant rock, a temple that's been carved into rock? That's a real temple. It's actually a treasury. And it was actually carved by the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. That's really what we know the Edomites for today. The book of Obadiah, which is the shortest book of the Old Testament, it also touches on the Edomites, though we don't spend too much time. Anyway, those are the 2 sister nations, right? Ishmael and Isaac were brothers. Ishmael started the Ishmaelites. Jacob and Esau were brothers. Esau started the Edomites. There were also 2 cousin nations. Abraham's nephew, Lot, had 2 daughters. And after Lot was rescued from Sodom and Gomorrah, those 2 daughters drugged their father and raped their father and conceived children by their father. One daughter gave birth to Moab, and the other daughter gave birth to Ammon. Those two men, Moab and Ammon, formed their own nations, the Moabites and the Ammonites. Lot was the cousin of Isaac, and so that's why I described them as the cousin nations. So, anyway, so whenever you hear tell in the Bible about the Edomites, or the Ishmaelites, or the Moabites, or the Ammonites, remember that they are biologically related to the Israelites. All right, page 81 here. Now we're going to look at some of the world empires that arose and fell. Right? There were a few of them. Let's see. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. There were 5 of them. Right? We're only going to look at maps of 4 of them because in the last section we'll look at the Roman Empire. First empire to rise was Assyria. Assyria is most well known for today being the city that Jonah was sent to, being the nation that Jonah was sent to. Jonah was sent to Assyria's capital, which was what? Nineveh. And he was told to preach against them. Assyria, for Bible significance, keeping this in your mind, Assyria is the one who conquered the northern kingdom. So the north was conquered by Assyria. All right, on to the next page, page 82. After Assyria came Babylon. I want to point this out because I forgot to use the last map. But look for Mesopotamia on your map on page 82. You can see that Assyria and Babylon both are there in Mesopotamia. So, Mesopotamia's birthplace of civilization. 2, I said 3 earlier, but 2 of the world empires originated from Mesopotamia. Anyway, Babylon comes in, conquers Assyria, and then comes down and it conquers the southern kingdom. Assyria was not able to fully conquer the southern kingdom, but Babylon was able to fully come and conquer the southern kingdom. Most notably, Daniel and Ezekiel are 2 Israelites who are carried into Babylonian captivity. All right, on to page 83. Next comes the Persian Empire. Persia originated just east of Mesopotamia, so still in the general area of the world. Persia came in, conquered Babylon. The night that it was conquered, that Babylon was conquered, is recorded in Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5 records the fall of the city of Babylon, which is the capital of the empire of Babylon. Persia comes in and conquers pretty much everything, even all the way down into Egypt. After that, page 84, we start to get into the Grecian Empire with Alexander the Great. This is going to cover the time period between the Testaments. So the Old Testament is closed. The Old Testament finishes off while still under the Persian Empire. But in the New Testament, or between the Old Testament and the New Testament, Alexander the Great comes in. And in just 13 years, Alexander the Great conquers almost everything. So he starts there in the top left-hand corner in the region of Greece and Macedonia. Right? Alexander the Great was actually Macedonian, but his father Philip united the Greeks and the Macedonians together. And then they came in and they conquered all of the Persian Empire, then some. They extended their borders in just 13 years. They extended their borders all the way to the Indus River, which isn't even on this map. It's to the right-hand side of this map, starting to get into India. And then what happened to Alexander the Great very suddenly? He died. Very suddenly he died. His empire was split up into 4 basic sections. Cassander and Lysimachus, 2 of his generals, took the Greece and Macedonia up there in the north. And then Ptolemy took Egypt, and Seleucus took everything else. Took the bulk of the land. That's how it lasted until the Roman Empire, in which the Roman Empire conquered the fractured Grecian Empire. That brings us to the 1st century, also known as the New Testament. Page 85. All right, now we're zoning back in on the Promised Land, aren't we? However, the Promised Land looks a little bit differently now. All right, it's still got the Dead Sea, it's still got the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, it's got the Mediterranean Sea, but the regions are different. No longer are they divided by tribes. Now they're divided by regions. The Romans came in and they split the land into different regions, similar how we split up our country into states, and our states into counties, right? So that's what's going on here. We'll just focus on this morning, we'll focus on 3 different regions. The first one is Galilee. So you've got the Sea of Galilee, but you also got the region of Galilee, right? Very similar to how we've got Craighead Forest and Craighead. Is Craighead like named after the park, or is it? What is it named after? Is it what?
County?
Yeah, you got Craighead County, and then you got Craighead Park, right?
Are you asking which county?
You know what? Let's go back to the Bible. I made a mistake. Okay. Galilee, the region, is named after the Sea of Galilee. Alright, and so there are 2 different names. Then you come down to Samaria. Samaria used to be just a city, but now it's turned into its own region. So if you came from the region of Samaria, you're called a Samaritan, right? That's where the Good Samaritan came from. And then just one more south is Judea. Judea and Judah are different. Judea came from the name Judah, but Judea refers to the first century region that used to be Judah. So anyway, those are the first century regions. Jesus travels a lot, especially from Galilee down into Judea. All right, page 86. We're going to look at the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was built on top of 2 mountains, Mount Moriah and Mount Zion. You've heard of Mount Zion before. The name Mount Zion became a very symbolic name, used of a lot of different ideas, but it started off as just its own mountain. So you're on top of Mount Moriah. Jerusalem's built on top of Mount Moriah and Mount Zion. The temple is built on top of Mount Moriah, and it's called the Temple Mount by the time we come to the 1st century. Right? There's nothing else on the peak of Mount Moriah other than the temple. And then the residential district of Jerusalem is built on Mount Zion. So everyone lived on Mount Zion. Also, by the time we come to the 1st century, there's this extra portion of land that's added on to the city of Jerusalem. So you can see there's 3 basic sections to the city of Jerusalem, kind of 4 depending on how you count it. But anyway, you've got the Temple Mount, and then you've got this giant piece of land on the bottom there. That is what's called Old Jerusalem. And then that northern section that extends into the middle, that northern section of Jerusalem, that's newer Jerusalem because it was new relative to the other. Another thing to notice with the city of Jerusalem is not only was it built on the peaks of 2 mountains, but it was also built between 2 valleys. On the left-hand side, you got the Valley of Hinnom, which is more commonly known as Gehenna. The word Gehenna literally means Valley of Hinnom. And you've got the Valley of Kidron. The Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, was used as a trash dump and a burning pit, which is why Jesus used the word Gehenna to describe hell. Right? Because that's what hell is on a spiritual basis. It's a trash dump and it's a burning pit for all of eternity. So he uses a word that they would have been very familiar with, Gehenna, to describe a spiritual concept. The Kidron Valley, on the other side of the Kidron Valley is the Mount of Olives. Jesus goes there often. Just north of the Mount of Olives is the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where Jesus was betrayed. And then just outside of the newer Jerusalem, that district, you can probably see it is Golgotha, which is also called Calvary. That's where Jesus would have been crucified. So, 2 mountaintops and 2 valleys, 2 big valleys around Jerusalem. So, all right, going on to the next one, page 87. Now we start to get into Paul's journeys. There are 4 journeys, 3 missionary journeys, and the fourth journey to Rome as a prisoner. Paul, look at this picture, draw your eye immediately to the Dead Sea. Paul routinely includes Jerusalem in his journeys. He also routinely includes Antioch in his missionary journeys. Antioch is to the far north of the Promised Land, so it's outside the Promised Land borders, but it's still relatively close. Paul leaves Antioch, sails to that island of Cyprus, and then sails into the regions of Lycia, Phrygia, and Galatia. Galatia is its own region. Paul establishes several churches while in Galatia, and that's to whom the book of Galatians is written. Then he ends up going back to Jerusalem at the conclusion of his first journey. On the next page, page 88, his second journey leaves Jerusalem, and on foot he goes back through Galatia. And then from Galatia and Phrygia and those regions, he goes into Asia Minor. Asia Minor is to whom is where those 7 churches were that the book of Revelation was addressed to. From Asia Minor, he crosses the Aegean Sea, which is that sea there dividing Greece and Asia Minor. He crosses the Aegean Sea and goes into Macedonia. You remember in the song we've heard the Macedonian call today. Paul was called to cross into Macedonia, no longer stay in Asia Minor, but go on into Macedonia. And from Macedonia he goes down into Greece, which Greece at that time was renamed to Achaia, something phrase like that, Achaia, Achaia. Achaia is where Athens was, and very close to Athens was our friend Corinth, right? We obviously in the Bible read a lot about Corinth. Corinth and Athens are right next to each other in Greece, in Achaia. All right, and then Paul sails back. Actually, he traveled, let's see. Yeah, he sails back through the Aegean Sea, back into Asia Minor to the city of Ephesus. He has a few conversations there at Ephesus, doesn't make any converts, and hurries back home to Jerusalem, telling them at the end of his short stay in Ephesus, guys, once I fulfill my duties in Jerusalem, I'm going to come right back here and I'm going to teach you all the gospel. And that's what he does. Missionary trip number 2 ends in Jerusalem. Missionary trip number 3 sees him go back into Asia Minor, go back to Ephesus, and almost the entire biblical record of the third missionary journey is just spent in Ephesus. He spends about 3 years in Ephesus, and we really know very little about his third missionary journey except for his time spent in Ephesus. So he spends 3 years in Ephesus, then he goes back into Macedonia, and it's presumed that he also goes back into Greece, and he revisits Corinth, and then he goes back to, on his return journey to Jerusalem, he starts headed back towards Ephesus. He stops in Troas, Acts 20 and verse 7. That's where on the first day of the week the disciples came together and broke bread. That's his return trip from the third missionary journey. And then later on in Acts chapter 20, he stops in, it's Miletus, right next to Ephesus, and that's where he has that final discussion with the Ephesian elders. Anyway, almost the entire biblical record of the third missionary journey centers around Ephesus. Then he comes home and he gets arrested in Jerusalem. Then the final chart, we'll open up for conversations after this. We've got about 5 minutes left right now. Final chart, Paul's final journey back to, that concludes the book of Acts. This journey takes him all the way to the city of Rome. He's arrested in Jerusalem, and then through a lot of different trials and tribulations, he finally makes his way to modern day Italy, which is where Rome was, which is where the city of Rome was, and the book of Acts ends with him being in prison in the city of Rome. A couple things to point out with this map is, first of all, this map shows also the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was kind of unusual among all the world empires ever to exist. When you look at most maps of a nation, you're usually going to see that you've got that the center, that the geographical center of that nation is land, right? So, picture a map of the United States in your mind. The center is about Kansas, right? That's not how the Roman Empire was built. The Roman Empire was built all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So everything in this map, almost everything in this map is the Roman Empire. Or at least everything on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire built its entire empire around an ocean, around a coastline, right? That was kind of unusual. Second thing I want us to notice from this final map is that this is the western region of the Holy Land. So we started our class looking at the eastern region, which extends to Mesopotamia, and this is the western region, which extends to Italy. All of the biblical records, as far west as they go, end up here in Italy, end up here in Rome. So, by the way, I meant to say this. Italy is that boot-shaped peninsula right there jutting out into the Mediterranean Sea. So, all right, that's going to conclude. We've got 2.5 minutes left. Any thoughts or questions on Bible maps? That was a lot of material. You didn't think we could get through the entire Bible record in one class period, did you? We had our doubts, but we got through it, didn't we? Lots of maps, lots of locations. The nice thing about looking at Bible maps, though, is that once you figure out one location, you realize, okay, almost everything happened in this one area. And so it's not like you have to memorize this map, that map, and a bunch of other maps. It's really, you memorize one map, and that's where everything happened in the Bible.
So all the scrolls
Mhm.
that they found that we have, like the New Testament,
Yeah.
those have all been found in this area. Like, this is the only place we've,
So the Dead Sea Scrolls come from the Dead Sea,
Right.
caves in the Dead Sea, right? The Greek manuscripts there's about 6,000 Greek manuscripts. They come from all over the place, and they've been passed down from generation to generation. We don't have very many very old Greek manuscripts. The two oldest are the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. One was found in Sinai, right, which is the Sinai Peninsula. That was discovered in 1840, the 1840s. And then the other one was just, the other oldest one, the Vaticanus, was discovered in the Vatican, which is in modern day Italy. That one was discovered in the 1860s. So those are the two oldest of the New Testament manuscripts, and then the oldest of the Old Testaments were discovered in the Dead Sea. So they're scattered around. Other thoughts or questions or comments?
Any idea of how many miles it was from where they started all the way over to Italy?
I don't know about Italy, but if I recall correctly, from the Promised Land to the city of Babylon, I think it's 1,200 miles. And so, if you're thinking about that with a car, that's going to be about a 16 and 17-hour road trip, right? So if I were just going to guess from the Promised Land all the way to Italy, I'd say a little longer than that, maybe 1,700 to 2,000 miles. That's a guess, though.
Looks farther than that. I mean, I'll have to be done by a while.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a guess. Yeah.
you had to go
Yeah.
just on the plane